I know that at some point you have read a Dungeons & Dragons adventure and something just felt off. Let's say it's a dungeon with some original monsters. They're cool. It's got a clear map and whoa, that's a complex trap. My players are gonna love that. Oh, wait, right there. How do the monsters get easily around this trap to the other areas of the dungeon? It looks like those deeper parts are their living quarters, so they must be... Say no more. What you have just witnessed is a tiny example of the most overlooked, most hand-waved problem in tabletop RPG design: ecology. Oh, ecology, like food and water sources and stuff? Oh, that doesn't matter. Just don't think too hard about that, yeah. That right there is the weak response from professional game designers, D&D YouTubers, and most game masters when questioned on this topic, completely throwing out the baby with the bath water source, even though ecology clearly has an impact on how we write and run adventures. Like many parts of design, you only don't notice the ecology when it is done well. And I can only assume the reason so many people casually dismiss it as unimportant is because the average person only has a vague grade school memories of like the food chain and photosynthesis, mitochondria, powerhouse of the cell. Thumbs up for mitochondria, but no, that's already getting off topic. But by the end of this video, you will be smarter than the average game designer when it comes to ecology and be able to use your foundational ecology knowledge to make your fantasy games more fun. Because I'm Bob, this is where we learn how to have more fun playing RPGs together, and I probably should have stated my authority on this topic sooner, but the two college degrees that I rarely use are a bachelor's and a master's in Earth and Environmental Science with a focus in forest ecology. Who could have guessed? But what I'm not going to do is beat you over the head with too much science jargon like a GM giving a lore dump about how the trade routes work in their fantasy setting. Spoiler, that's kinda ecology too. Instead, let's just take 10 seconds to refresh the part you remember from school. Sunlight hits leaf, then solar energy plus water and nutrients equals food source. Literally, photosynthesis, light put together. This process is a great example of how every living thing, well, so undead, constructs, elementals, maybe devils, but they kind of need souls, right? Every living thing needs some form of energy, nutrients, and water to survive, and because of that cool process, plants are the foundation supporting almost all life on planet Earth and the material plane. Even this guy that was just crawling on my camera never really studied the bugs of the forest, so I can't tell you what it is, but someone in the comments probably can. And maybe the best proof that some game designers they don't know what they're talking about is how fungus monsters in D&D are categorized as plants. Fungi don't photosynthesize. That's a completely different kingdom of life. Calling myconids plants is like calling bears plants. And this is also why it bothers me that most fantasy worlds have so few interesting plants and plant creatures. Like any foundation, this base of the food chain needs to be the biggest, most diverse part. So if you want more cool plant monsters right now, you want to check out today's sponsor. The Bad Patch for D&D 5e contains well over 100 unique plant-type monsters, and by the looks of it, they are actually plants. Speaking of looks, this incredible artwork, literally this spread right here, is what first captured my attention. But every creature is so colorful, so weird. Look at this extra acidic lemon guy and this cucumber, ironically wielding spears. Still, the book is much more than just cool art and plant monsters. 5 new monstrous classes, 60 new spells, dynamic actions for bloodied and dying creatures, new mechanics for hallucination and allergens. As someone with springtime allergies, that's almost too real for me, and it's telling of the publisher's experience with horror books for 5e. Likewise, the Bad Patch is woven together by the tale of Abeloth, the Lord of Rot, awakening these plants to do his evil bidding in a dark forest setting. And you can check it all out today on Kickstarter using my link below so they know who sent you. Now, you know the rest of the food chain. Little animal eats plant, bigger or smarter animal eats little animal, and so on, until gross little animals and fungi recycle everything. But we're missing two simple details that are not only applicable, but inspiring, impressive, and fun when applied to a fantasy dungeon or setting. One, rather than using a linear food chain, ecologists often describe an organism's role, and I'm not kidding, as a non-Euclidean hypervolume. But let's just call it a puzzle, where every creature fits in a particular place between the resources it needs, and messing with any of its resources or moving it to another place creates conflict. That is the foundation of every good story. What resource does the big bad evil guy need to achieve or maintain his desired place? And a dragon invaded the orcs' place, so the orcs moved into the were-rats' place. Now the were-rats are disturbing the villagers' place. That is basically the setup for one of my favorite D&D adventures. And our second simple but impactful point, while nutrients kinda can be recycled infinitely through an ecosystem again and again, energy cannot. Some energy is lost in every transfer between animals. That's why we need tons of plants and insects and other tiny organisms just to sustain even a few top predators. And that's why a typical dungeon populated mostly by predatory and parasitic organisms feeding on each other again and again is unsustainable, but in our case, creates degenerative, mutated monsters. Therefore, take, for example, this ecologically sound dungeon I designed a couple months ago. In its stable state, there's an ogre, oozes, giant rats, and a special resource we'll talk about in a minute, and each monster has a way cooler description than that, but that's not what this video is about. Since the ogre can more easily find water and food outside the dungeon in the surrounding forested mountains, it lives right in the entrance of this abandoned mine, just using it for shelter. Also, that is a perfectly valid way to hand-wave water and food sources because it's the path of least resistance to find them in an abundant forest. However, like a lot of animals, this ogre needs one more thing: enrichment. So for fun, it likes to reach into the rocky crawlway where the oozes live, so they'll latch onto it for a while, and that makes the ogre feel sleepy for a couple hours. Ogre ecology done. And that gives us an awesome Snorlax-style guardian for the dungeon. Now the oozes are very simple creatures, and as you might have guessed based on that interaction, these ones need blood. A few feed on the ogre in a sort of symbiotic relationship, but most use the rocky crawlways to get outside and feed on forest animals, or they live deep in the mine, feeding on the giant rats. Oozes done. And in turn, the oozes are the main food and water source for the rats, in addition to other rats, so this colony is unhealthy and has mutated over time, mostly living in this dark chasm far below that naturally collects water and has deposits of a mineral, the same material that was mined here long ago and the same material now incorporated into the mutant rat's own teeth, allowing them to chew through ordinary rock and find more of it, and to create those crawlways now used by the oozes. Ecology done. But of course, we need conflict. Our conflict could just be the player characters coming in and disturbing this ecosystem, but I wrote this dungeon for a one-shot, so I wanted more disruption and, frankly, more cool monsters. So that's where some weird lizard men come in. They invade the place. They're too numerous and too spry for the ogre to keep out, and too scaly for the oozes to feed on, so they venture deep, very deep into the mines, and find a door, a massive door, forged out of that same rare, valuable metal, which they may know as dwarf steel, but they could not read the ancient dwarvish runes burned into the door, defacing it with the warning, never open. And to be clear, I never dumped any of that background info on my players. Here's the whole prompt. Then they got some rumors about the mine loosely based on all those cool monsters. Pause here if you want to check them out. And then we just start the adventure right outside the mine entrance. But by taking a little time to answer these simple ecological questions for each monster, what does it need? Where does it get it? I was able to give my players this interconnected puzzle of a dungeon. So, my players who enjoy puzzles got a whole extra layer of fun brainstorming and discoveries, while my players who don't care for puzzles don't have to deal with any of the side effects of bad ecology because it was done well. And if we scale up these same questions, what does it need? Where does it get it? That's how we can easily make connections and conflicts between factions like guilds, cults, or whole kingdoms. But remember this, you, as a game designer or game master, should not have a hard answer for everything. You just need to make sure that your dungeon or setting is reasonable within a fantasy world. So that gives us a lot of wiggle room to make things up, but my point is, you should also leave gaps for those problem-solving players to fill in cool answers that you would never have imagined, but dang, that's a good answer, so write it down. That is the answer now. But wait, Bob, you say in the comments, what about ultra-deep environments where there's no sunlight for plants to be the base of the food chain, and it's too deep for easy passages to get resources from outside? The crudely simple answer is that some bacteria can eat rocks. Maybe worth another video for Underdark ecology. Right now, just remember that second simple point about energy being lost at every step up the food chain, because that gives us a scientifically valid yet simple approach to setting up random encounter tables described in this video on your screen. So thanks again to our sponsor and to my patrons for giving me the resources I need to make these videos. Keep building.